So what really happened to Anne Heche? Sorry, Heche. As the story goes, on August 5th of 2022, Anne Heche met an untimely end after her blue Mini Cooper slammed headlong into the wall of someone's home in Los Angeles, California, specifically the neighborhood of Mar Vista. Quickly the house caught fire, and then eventually the car began catching fire, and so did Anne to some degree. The firefighters were slow to respond and even slower to attempt helping Anne, so she sat in her car melting for roughly 49 minutes. I've heard numbers as high as 50 some odd minutes, or even 60. Well, when it was all said and done, Anne was removed from the car, which was badly burned, and was then taken to a hospital. And that is essentially how things went that day. Anne would officially die 1 week later in a coma, and then she would be unplugged by her family, and then she would have her organs harvested. I'm not kidding. As was supposedly her expressed wishes, although I haven't seen where those wishes were expressed, let alone expressed expressly. And that is the official narrative, as it stands. But I happen to be privy to another story, and if we know anything on this channel, it's the other story. The kind of story that doesn't just ignore glaring issues like motive, or cause, or potential foul play, and one that also answers the glaring question of what and who may have caused Anne Heche to careen into a wall of someone's home at 90 miles per hour, depending on the story you read, on that fateful August 5th day, or why there were no signs of her attempting to break, among all the other strange things that happened in that incident. So today we're going to seek to answer everything from where Anne Heche began to the body bag she ended up in and everything in between. It's going to be a ride, so stick along and I hope you guys enjoy. It only seems fitting for me in a story like this to begin at the end, so let's start on that final day of Anne Heche's. The first thing on the radar we have of her is in the morning around 10 a.m. when she purchases a nearly neon wig from a store named Glass Hair. The man pictured in the photo is the owner of the store, and he later gives an intriguing interview. Let's listen to it.
I thought it was Anne Heche, and from there she asked if she could purchase a red wig that was up top, and I said sure. And as I bring it down, I tell her that it's not cut or styled. She said she didn't care. She wanted it anyway. So from there, I bring it down. I tell her it's a little bit dusty. She says, no worry, just sell me some shampoo and conditioner. It was just so random, so random. Wasn't speaking in cursive. You know, I say that, you know, if people are impaired, you know, they speak in cursive because it's like you're slurring your words. But she wasn't. She was very, very cordial, very personable, very polite. And yeah, like the whole encounter was maybe 10 minutes. So it wasn't huge, but it was strange all the same.
At this point, I want to highlight a few things that he emphasized. 1, that she was kind. 2, that she showed no signs of intoxication. And 3, she was just overall friendly to him and expressed interest in what he does. Which is important because, as the media will tell us later, it's the exact opposite. That Anne was in a state of intoxication, and that was the reason she slammed into that wall. But as we'll also get to later, that is completely untrue. After spending about 10 minutes at the salon getting the wig, Anne then moves on to another place, and around 10:30 we pick her up once more. This time at one of those storage locker places. I've also heard it reported as a garage of some kind. And all we know is that her car is in, on, or touching one of these garages. There's the implication of an accident, but I don't see a whole lot of damage, which makes me a little suspicious of what was actually going down there, because the media reported this as some big accident, but clearly it wasn't. So I don't know exactly what to make of that. What is important to note, though, is that in this video I'm showing you on screen, we can see Anne's car, and then there's also this man yelling at her to get out of it, presumably just a bystander. Obviously, we know that Anne does not get out of the car, and later she's going to speed off and almost hit the guy. But one thing to note first, before we get there, is that at this very moment, I'm not sure Anne Heche is in control of the car any longer, which is going to become a theme throughout this video. A very common theory, as we'll get to, is that Anne Heche was not actually in control of her car, and one can make the argument that Anne might have been having a normal day going and getting that wig, which was obviously for some occasion, and then it was at this moment at the garage, or as she was driving by, that she lost control of the car. We don't really know, but that's something I want to put out there.
No, out of the car. No, out of the car. Out of the car.
I'm out of this.
I would be curious though if anyone who knows Anne sees this, or anyone else has any theories of why she went and bought that wig, because it was clearly for something and that was never answered by the police or the media. Shocker, right? During this same time in which she's at this garage or storage locker place, there's an infamous photo taken of Anne Heche, where I'm not gonna lie, it looks like she's been melting. Like, it looks like she's melting like a snow cone. She looks different even from the photo she was taken in just 20 minutes earlier. This girl does not look healthy. Something seems wrong with her. But something even more intriguing that people notice is that there's this empty bottle of what appears to be alcohol in her cup holder in the front of her car. And this has led many people over the years to believe that this was a intoxication-based crash, which, as I stated, we'll see later it wasn't, but it has caused a lot of speculation then about if Anne had drank this or if it was someone else's. But nonetheless, to my knowledge, this is the last picture we have of Anne Heche prior to her collision. Because about a half an hour later, Anne's Mini Cooper is caught on a Ring doorbell camera showing it flying down a suburban neighborhood street at anywhere from 70 to 90 miles per hour, which is really fast in a neighborhood. It is a bit hard to actually find the original footage, but we did yesterday on stream, and I want to play it for you because there's something interesting that the audio of the doorbell camera picks up, which is likely why I think that this footage has been so heavily buried by the other news media reportings made on top of it. Because in it, if you listen, you can hear a squealing coming from the car, which sort of, to me, reminds me of what you might hear if you were to throw the e-brake when you were going really, really fast. And if that's the case, then we're gonna have to wonder why she didn't just hit the brakes herself and had to throw the e-brake. Unfortunately, as we can see, the e-brake did not help, and e-brakes don't really help, gotta keep that in mind anymore, especially with more modern cars. But it is another suggestion that something strange is afoot. And the other key detail about this scene that is never discussed in the mainstream media, that was never answered by the police, is why do we not see a single skid mark anywhere on this entire stretch of road from Anne Heche's car? Are you gonna tell me she didn't try and stop at all? If that's the case, then why didn't they label this a self-ending? But they didn't. They never actually gave us a cause of what happened to Anne, besides she passed away from a coma and smoke inhalation. So there is a question to be asked there, considering the motive was never given, so what happened? The next time we see Anne, or hear of Anne really, is right after this collision, because a bunch of the neighbors, including the doorbell cam guy, will run up to the car and try and help Anne, which is an intriguing point that's made, because there are several interviews where you can hear the witnesses discussing how they were talking with Anne and asking her things like, "Are you okay? Are you alive? Can we help you?" And Anne's responding, "I'm not okay," but she was clearly alive. And yet, no one seems to really go and help her. And that's a point I'm confused about. It's very well possible that there was some sort of fire already started that couldn't reach her, but that's not specified. And we know that the fire didn't get big until later. So I'm not really sure why no one immediately went to help Anne and what was going on about that. I also find it rather startling that Anne Heche survived going up to 100 miles per hour, as some news media erroneously reported, into a wall in a car as small as a Mini Cooper. The fact that she was still conscious is amazing, because the fact that she isn't dead is wild. I mean, that car is not very durable. So there's another question brought up by how did Anne even survive that accident? And it likely will suggest that she wasn't meant to, so the fact that she did added extra problems, as I think we're all going to see here shortly. After that, though, we do know that a fire engulfed the house and subsequently the car, and that did make it harder to reach Anne. However, it wasn't impossible, as some have reported. The same method that the firefighters eventually used to get Anne out was connecting a winch to the back of her car to pull her out, which could have been done earlier on, but it wasn't. For whatever reason, I can't tell you. Meaning that this whole time, which was around 50 minutes, Anne was melting inside of her car, inside of a burning house. And the pictures inside the car later on are pretty horrifying to think what was going on to Anne then at the same time. Furthermore, the amount of time it took these 56 separate firefighters to put out this fire is pretty crazy. Similar fires in what are relatively small homes have a much faster rate of being put out. It's something like 30 minutes, and that was with smaller teams. So there are some questions there as well. All to say, statistically speaking, the amount of time it took them to deal with the fire in Anne is slow. But the moment that speaks the loudest is the most infamous moment relating to Anne Heche. And this is what, in a kind of dark and twisted way, most people know Anne Heche for better than almost any of her other roles. It's what happens on this gurney. What I'm going to show you next is some of the last and rarest footage of this case. It's relatively easy to find clips, but to find the full footage can be very, very difficult. And it's important to note that the only reason we have this is LA has a history of just having helicopters go to crimes and crime scenes or car chases and stuff like that, where more so than any other, they'll even interrupt public broadcasting and television to start displaying such crimes, like they did with the OJ case. So without these helicopters and this unique situation in LA, we actually probably wouldn't know what happened to Anne, but thankfully we do. So I'm gonna play this one once for you guys, just straight through, and then we're gonna go frame by frame, because there's some stuff that I did not notice the first several times when I watched this.
Make entry into the car. Believe me, I am listening to what these guys are talking about. Oh, maybe they're bringing them out the other side. We just can't see it because, yes, they got them out the passenger side, thank God. And this is the first time we're going to see this victim. It doesn't look that good, but yeah, it does look terrible. We'll just see if maybe they're just moving them out of there, or if they put them in an ambulance. That's some sort of sign, but yes. So basically the activity that we were looking for, that anxious or that quick moving, that was going on the other side of the vehicle. Oh my God.
So without me explaining this, you should probably be understanding what's really bizarre going on here, but just wait, because there's some stuff I want to add, that's for sure. Number one, Anne's body is in a body bag, despite still being alive. Also, I noticed it's convenient that they're strapping her up and putting her into said body bag beneath the tree canopy, which prevents the helicopter from seeing them, suggesting that they were fully aware that they were being watched. Number two, she is being strapped down to a gurney forcefully and into this coarse body bag. This is the same chick that is later reported as having roughly, according to the estimate from the autopsy, roughly 12% of her body covered in second-degree burns. That would be excruciating in and of itself, but then having this tough fabric and these polyester or nylon, whatever they're made out of, straps, also then digging into your skin. Oh, could you imagine? That'd be horrifying. Also worth note though, despite this 12% number reported in the autopsy, you don't really seem to see those burns in the actual video. That's just my take though. Number three, there are 6 fire trucks here, at least, and there's only 1 ambulance that we can see, which makes no sense. I've never seen a case where they sent 6 fire trucks and there weren't at least an equivalent or close to number of ambulances. Because you have a case where a car just ran into someone's house. So at the very least, at minimum, one person's injured in the car, maybe more. And then you've also got everyone inside the house that could also be injured. So you should have multiple ambulances there just for them. And then neighbors, or if other people were hit when the car was going so fast, it just simply would not make sense to have only 1 ambulance there. Number 4, have you noticed anything strange about the way these people are taking Anne Heche, and more specifically, what these people are wearing? Something just seems to stand out about them. The first thing is that the people taking Anne Heche into the ambulance are firefighters, not paramedics, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever. In fact, I don't even think I see a single paramedic or someone I can truly 100% say is a paramedic in any of these shots. Worth noting that there are firefighters there who I have respect for. I think firefighters are some of the bravest people in this country. Walking to burning buildings to save people from melting, yeah, I appreciate people doing that. That's a huge and incredibly powerful thing, and what a sacrifice being made. Truly. That being said, I think if most firefighters would say that something is wrong with this group of people. Their uniforms are completely clean. They don't even look like the same exact uniforms the actual firefighters are wearing. And on top of that, they have these weird hard hats on that don't match what you typically see from firefighters. Nothing makes sense. And it's also worth noting we're talking about Hollywood here. There's going to be the best in class props, and there's going to be tons of actors to choose from if you were to stage something like this. And these props would be better looking than your Halloween City, to the point they're almost indistinguishable, but are still going to have some clear flaws, like we've just pointed out. And even strangers, when they're dealing with Anne Heche and they're putting her into the back of this ambulance, they are so forceful with her, it's hard to watch. I gotta imagine if this was genuine, just a normal case, your body would be in so much pain after being treated that way. Something's wrong is what we can come to from this. And number 5, and obviously the most strangest, above all of these things we've talked about, is I shouldn't have to say this, but for someone who is reported as comatose in the hospital after this incident and has now inhaled 50 minutes worth of smoke and soot and melting plastic and burning everything, where she's hotboxing all of this crap into her body. She shouldn't be moving anywhere. There should be no movement from her because she's apparently comatose at this point. And as I will challenge anybody to, the initial reporting on this case was that Anne Heche had died at the scene. It was only later when that story shifted. Now, if you were to look this up, if you were to go through the first dozen pages of articles, you will see that your CNN, MSNBC, Fox, whatever other slot media, they report that Anne Heche will end up dying later. But me and basically everyone I've talked to about this was under the impression and remembers being told and shown articles that Anne Heche had died at the scene. That is really bizarre. So something's not adding up here. But no matter what, the point is Anne Heche shouldn't be moving because she also just slammed 100 miles per hour into the side of a house. That should knock anybody out cold, if not just straight up end the person's life right there. Keeping that in mind, if she somehow did survive this, her body would be in fragments, like her neck would be shattered. She would be in a neck brace, you might think at the very minimum, but no, she's not. The other thing you might anticipate would be that she would have oxygen being pumped into her with a mask on because she was just inhaling all of that crap and hadn't had actual fresh oxygen. And no, once again, we don't see that at all. And obviously, if this is somebody who's just sustained all these injuries, they're not going anywhere. So why have you strapped her down, including around what would be her neck and upper body? That doesn't make sense. You don't tie someone down who's just been unable to breathe actual fresh air, and you don't tie someone down who has broken limbs everywhere because you're only risking doing more damage. So either these are the worst first responders ever, or they're not actually first responders. But even darker, there is a moment where Anne seems to realize just how screwed she is and how wrong everything happening is. And that's the infamous moment we've all seen where she rises up from the gurney and fights to get out of that body bag. But what I also noticed was she gets up and she gets out, and dude, she's like, you can see her whole body lurching for this thing. She seems to have come out of like a stupor of some kind. She reaches down for the strap around her leg to try and untie it before she's pushed back down and shoved inside of this ambulance and is literally never seen by the public again. If this isn't the most clear sign of trying to escape, then I don't know what is. And obviously we do know that Anne failed to escape. Anne's little Alcatraz escape moment definitely caused some problems for whoever was orchestrating this, because now they're in a bit of a kerfuffle. You can't just report Anne Heche is dead now, like they originally did. I'm telling you they did it. I've seen it. You can't just report that incident as being her final moments because people have now seen her on live television and across social media as rising up from this body bag that she was in. So there is a really ridiculous and strange interlude that occurs, where Heche's PR team and a bunch of media outlets report that Anne is now in stable condition, which clearly, no, she's not. And then there's like a couple days where the story just drops and we're waiting for new news. And then when suddenly, boom, Anne Heche is now no longer stable, but she's in a coma. And then boom, a handful of days later, she's dead again. Telling you what happened. And then 2 days after that, family's allegedly unplugging her and she's getting chopped up by the doctors to be sent to all sorts of organ donors. And there's problems with that in my mind, 100 of them. But the most interesting one to me is who's taking these organs? These aren't exactly the best and top quality pieces you can get on the market, if you get what I'm saying. She's a lifelong drug user and she's abused the crap out of her body. And she's pretty old. Let's be realistic. So this whole organ donating scam idea doesn't really fly with me. At this point, I want to make a note. Many people find it to be some crazy conspiracy theory that you can shut down or control someone's car remotely. This has been going on for decades, though. This isn't even an argument at this point. The government's mandating kill switches, remote kill switches in all vehicles produced 2025 and later. So no. It's not crazy. In addition to that, we also have incidences we will discuss of where it's very clear that this happened. In fact, the first video on my channel, or the second actually, was just talking about Paul Walker's case of a very similar kind to what's going on here today. But it is worth noting, I want to specify this is not crazy whatsoever. I'm going to show you a couple of videos that just show you what civilians can do. So imagine what a corporation or a government with infinite money and manpower could do.
Hundreds of thousands of late model Chrysler vehicles may be vulnerable through a feature called Uconnect, an internet-connected computer in the dashboard known as its head unit.
These cars' head units expose a particular service that probably they didn't want to. It lets you do things like query it for information like the GPS or the VIN or all sorts of other things, but it also lets you just run commands.
So you have to first break into the car remotely over the cell network and then move laterally if you want to do things like send CAN messages. And those are the messages that we can use to control things like steering or the windshield wipers or braking.
They plan to release a portion of their exploit code at the annual Black Hat Hacker Conference next month. They've also alerted Chrysler, which is issuing a security patch. But they say a lot more needs to be done to protect a new generation of cars that are increasingly connected to the internet and potentially hackable. You guys basically brought this car to a standstill while it was driving on the highway, which I may never forgive you for. And that was just like an experiment. What do you think is the worst case scenario?
We wanted to point out, to show that this attack has serious consequences for this vehicle. And so we did, attack you. But we did it in as safe a way as we could, so we didn't want you to get hurt, obviously. That's why we're working, is to make sure that we figure out vulnerabilities, weaknesses, get them fixed.
We're only two guys with one car, right? So, we can't look at every car, and we want to release this information because more people like us need to be focused on this problem.
After their stunt on the highway, Chris and Charlie still wanted to show me a couple of other tricks. Below a certain speed, they can control the Jeep's steering as long as it's in reverse, pop its locks, mess with the speedometer, and, of course, disable the brakes.
Okay, hold on tight. Hold on. Oh,
disable the brakes. Disable the brakes.
Now let's jump back into Anne's story. There's a very intriguing bit of information that came up. For like 2 weeks, you have the entire media and a lot of the general public, Twitter, that cancer cesspool, all going, oh my goodness, Anne Heche, she's so bad, she rammed her car into someone's house. Okay. And then they would always follow it up with, and she was so drunk and high, and why would she do that? As it turns out, we get the autopsy report, which eventually comes out. And in that autopsy report, we learn that Anne Heche was on drugs. Many days ago, all that was left in her body was metabolized parts of the, restroom sink powder. And then there's also some green funny leaves that were in her system, the residue of it. Therefore, we know that she was not intoxicated whatsoever the day of the crash. That is really important to note, because the whole media was saying exactly the opposite of that. You gotta wonder why they would do that too. And then this bottle that was reported in Anne Heche's car, we're assuming it's alcohol, but we don't really know. However, even if it was, we know Anne Heche wasn't the one drinking it, or at least not recently. So in that case, it could have been anybody's. So I just wanna say, let's not jump on the choo-choo train of judgment, guys, before we know the autopsy results, okay? And the other thing that came to light in the autopsy was that the skin in the body itself that Anne Heche inhabited, her body had actually been in the process of healing over the burns. Grafting had occurred. And some people misinterpret this as medical grafting, but it's actually just her body was naturally healing, which one is cool that the body can do that, and two, so she was in at least some sort of health where her body was repairing itself. That seems kind of crazy. Doesn't seem like exactly the sort of stuff that would imply that someone's gonna be in a permanent coma, but what do I know? Probably the sort of thing in my case, if I was thinking about a family member, that would give me hope and not unplug them, maybe. So I'm very suspicious about the family in that regard. Keeping these two things in mind, if Anne Heche was not intoxicated, and she had no motive for ending her existence, then what happened? Why did she slam into that wall? And this is what has given more credence to the fact that she wasn't in control. Combining that with the fact that you can hear what we believe to be the e-brake squealing like crazy, it's gonna be pretty tough to argue your way out of the fact that clearly something else is going on. Knowing what we know, you can hear the e-brake squealing, what we presume to be. You can see that she wasn't intoxicated, she had no motive for taking her own life. There was seemingly no reason for this to have occurred naturally. We have to look at some artificial reasoning, right? So I think we should just go look at what the police gave as the reason for her demise. Oh yeah, they didn't. I mean, so insofar as I'm aware, there was never an official police testimony where they were like, hey, this is why she did it. This is what we think. Not one. And in fact, after her passing, they kind of just went, we're not going to investigate this anymore. Case closed. We solved it. I don't know how. I'm not really sure how that's allowed to happen, but it did. And to this day, the LAPD has not further investigated the Anne Heche situation. And so it begins, the dive, the real one. Most people know Anne Heche for her final moments, like we said, but really in my mind, the answers to what led up to those final moments are found in her origin story, her proverbial beginning. Or essentially by going back to when she was a kid, because that is often where a lot of these answers lie in how people become who they are. for better or worse. And so I think it's worth us getting to know Anne Heche a little bit better. Anne Heche was born on May 25th of 1969 to a Christian family in Ohio. Represent Ohio? Ohio is where I'm from. We chew them like it's gum. Oh my goodness, don't quote me on that. Ostensibly, I should say they were a Christian family. The mom certainly was. She seems like a really kind woman. The dad, however, was not. He was literally a walking demon. And it's this evil that Anne Heche would see displayed in her father Donald that would later inspire a lot of her work and a lot of her issues as well. He was a man attempting to make ends meet, but never really fully applying himself to anything. He would often take the family cross-country on random business opportunities that were really half-fledged and kind of like scams. But I imagine during that time it was hard for him to focus on providing for his family because he was mostly focused on daughter Anne, which is really, really dark, but it is true. From the age of whenever you can remember things till 12 or 13 when her father died, Anne was consistently raped by her dad in a whole host of manners. This was while her dad was also having various homosexual relations with a bunch of different guys. So you can imagine the sort of trauma this would cause here, and I don't use that word lightly. And this also caused Anne Heche, as a literal preteen, to contract an STD from her dad, which I think that's why they invented wood chippers, is all I'll say. However, this torment came to an end, at least the physical torment, in 1983 when Anne Heche's father Donald died. He died, fun fact, of AIDS, and was among the first of patients to die of AIDS in America. You know, that thing the CIA made. This experience of being taken advantage of, I mean, you can imagine the damage it did, like we talked about, but it also caused Anne Heche to create an alter ego named Celestia, which was like a pseudo-angelic being who was just escaping everything that she was going through. A coping mechanism, but one that would have some dark implications later on. Truly, one could elaborate upon Anne Heche's childhood for a long time, but I think you get the point. There is a lot of wrong that happened to this woman. Needless to say, Anne Heche beginning her acting career was very much a come up for her. She went from making $100 as a waitress at some random restaurant to landing a reoccurring main role in this show called, two of them because she played twins, in a show called Another World in 1987. So this was huge for her. She went from no money, not being able to help her family out very much, to like, man, I can take care of all of them now, which must have been a pretty nice feeling for her. And Anne would continue in this role until 1991, when she won a Daytime Emmy for her role in this show, and it was for the Younger Actress on a Daytime TV Show award, which is pretty cool for her. For Anne, though, this was the end of both her on the show and the show itself, and so she began moving on to greener pastures. And in 1993, she was in the movie Huckleberry Finn. And at that point, things began percolating for Anne, and in 1997, she got her first major role in a film called Donnie Brasco, which made her one of the bigger up-and-coming females in Hollywood at that time. Needless to say, she's very popular among that boomer generation. I, however, have not seen anything Anne Heche related, except for some of the trailers we'll talk about later. And it was in 1997 that Anne Heche began dating Ellen DeGeneres. And this relationship caused all sorts of drama. I don't really care to get into it. It boils down to people didn't like her and Ellen pulling up to places together, and they really didn't like when Anne Heche brought Ellen to the premiere of her new film Volcano. That caused them to get kicked out. It was a whole ordeal. Whatever. I cannot stand pop culture drama at all. I don't care. But for our sake, it is important to discuss. Nonetheless, despite kind of being blackballed from Hollywood, not kind of like genuinely blackballed from Hollywood, this relationship continued until the year 2000 when Ellen and Anne broke up. And why this happened was very much a secret for a long time. And Anne wouldn't open up about this until the 2020s, so literally 20 plus years after the incident. And even then, it wasn't fully opening up, but she did reference that Ellen was incredibly greedy and also just kind of evil. One time, Anne said that she needed friends to Ellen, and Ellen said that she didn't want somebody who needed that. Weird. So all sorts of healthy dynamics in relationships are on display here. But nonetheless, the first Ellen connection has arrived. And it's important to keep in mind how Ellen and Anne were. And it seems that this early 2000s period was a very big stumbling block, mental shattering moment for Anne, at least for a short while. Because a very odd story is going to come to light about the two of them. The tale is vague, I will admit, but disturbing nonetheless. One day after Ellen and Anne break up, Anne stumbles down this incredibly long driveway to a rural ranch house in Fresno, California, on foot, begins banging on the homeowner's door, and when the homeowner comes out, the homeowner tells us that Anne had been calling herself Celestia and saying that she was a god and was going to take everyone back to heaven with her in a spaceship. Now, the exact words are hard to come by that were said, but there are various reports that give us a pretty clear depiction that this sounded like someone tweaking out. Now, this is obviously incredibly bizarre and would be freaky, but it does get stranger. I mentioned that Anne was on foot at this time, and that's because she had abandoned her car randomly on the side of the road decided to get out and then walk a full mile to this woman's house, which caused us to ask a lot of questions. And the first that I've not seen anybody else ask, despite these being quote-unquote paparazzi journals, whatever you want to call them, where was she before this? No one ever answers that question. Where was she coming from? Where was she going? What was happening in her life? And I'm serious, of the dozens of articles I've reviewed, I've not seen a single one actually tell us what was going on with Anne that would cause such an incident. And nor is there ever any answer to why she got out of the car and then walked to this random house. And if this house is truly random, I don't know. And the only other time we really hear about Celestia coming out to this level of a degree was when Anne was a child and was being actively her dad. So I began to wonder what was happening with this. Also, I want to break in here because there is a reference to Celestia in the relationship that she had with Steve Martin, who's 24 years older than her, and how there is a sort of father-daughter relationship there, which then makes me wonder what was going on with Steve Martin and Anne Heche, if there's something bad going on there. But other than that, you don't really hear about Celestia very much, often referred to as like a past version of Anne Heche. So for it to come back out in this incident where we have a time slip, we don't know what happened to Anne Heche in this time, and then she's saying all these freaky things to this woman, I gotta wonder if something really traumatic did happen to her that day, and that's what we don't know about, and that's why she's assuming this way. It also kind of comes across like she just escaped somebody or was trying to. I don't know. I'm a little freaked out by this incident, and I think I got nowhere near enough reporting, and despite what Anne Heche says later on, I don't think anyone's ever been honest about this. And all Anne Heche said was, I think I was crazy back then. Despite that, going back to the story, we have the EMTs eventually arriving and then taking Anne Heche to the hospital, and all they do is check on her for like 2 hours and then they let her go and say she's fine. So I'm a little weirded out there because the popular narrative, based on some of the things that were said, was that she was on ecstasy, but they say that she was on ecstasy because she referenced feeling like ecstatic or something like that. She never said specifically that she was. There's later reports that also kind of mix-match the narrative. The police suggest that there were signs that she was on drugs, but we also know that this whole heavenly being she's created is 100% in her head and isn't something that's brought on sheerly by the use of substances. So I think a lot of assumptions were made that I don't think were fair about Anne Heche. Digressing though, this trajectory of being blackballed from the industry did continue for Anne Heche for quite some time, out of the early 2000s and into the 2010s, and really up until the time she died. She never made a full comeback into Hollywood. I'm sure that this incident in 2000 didn't help. Most probably thought it was just a burnt out girl who had the chance of becoming a Hollywood figure, but had gotten hooked on substances and had sunk right as things were beginning to scale for her. Anne would continue acting in minor parts for years, doing voice acting, even in Adventure Time, which I thought was odd, but nothing really huge name, and she was kind of a forgotten character, truthfully. Supposedly in 2001, Anne Heche did a rehab stint as well, but I haven't heard any information that's come from this. I don't know if it was successful, but there is later video graphic evidence that suggests that Anne was maybe on some sort of substance, and we know that there were substances in her system at one point prior to her death. During this time, though, there are 2 roles that are standout. They weren't critically acclaimed or anything like that, but they reveal a different side of Anne that most people did not know. The first film was a movie called Toxic Skies, which, I kid you not, is about how the government and associated entities are creating a disease in a lab that they then artificially release via chemtrails, and then they blame it on something ridiculous. That movie dropped in 2008. I don't need to point out how bizarre that is for a dozen different reasons relating to our current timeline and the stuff that's happened in the past several years, we'll say. Really, this past several decades. But digressing, there's a lot of weirdness to the fact that that movie exists and that Anne Heche was in it. But the other film that got a lot of theorization, maybe even more than that one, was one called The Girl in Room 13, which is about a girl who is abducted by an ex-boyfriend and is trafficked. Understandably, this hits home for what we know about Anne's childhood, but it also has caused many people to speculate about her connection to Ellen. As we discussed, the two consorted with one another and then broke up after Anne became disturbed by who Ellen was, and we only ever figure out a part of what was disturbing, and it took 20 years to find that out. So this in mind, one might wonder why it took so long for even the smallest amount of information to drop about this breakup and the relationship. It's wholly weird, and these were 2 top-tier, quickly rising celebrities at the time. Gossip is what these creatures feed on, but both remained completely silent on the matter, with Ellen even decades later refusing to even comment on their time together, only going so far as to state that she didn't know why Anne broke up with her, which is likely a lie, but that's a story for another time. Anne would also brush these kinds of questions away as well, stating that she didn't want to talk about it. Later, we learned that she was scared. However, in 2021, that did all shift, and on an episode of Better Together with Anne and Heather, which was a podcast that Anne had with a chick named Heather Duffy, who would come on and then they would share this whole thing discussing whatever came to their minds. I don't think they ever made very many episodes from what I can find, but there were enough where we started getting some interesting intel. There's a specific episode during which Anne seems frantic and is tweaking the whole time, shaking like a leaf on a tree. And whether this is fear or something else, I'm not really going to speculate. I don't really need to disparage this woman's memory right now. But she does at certain points say some interesting things, the most poignant being the following. That how after 20 years, she's been feeling this oppressive feeling like she can't escape Ellen, like Ellen's trying to control her. But now that Ellen's moved to Africa, she feels like a new man. I kid you not. Listen to the clip. It does it better justice than I can.
Moment of my understanding in pop
we're
culture.
talking about Ellen?
Yes,
dear.
apparently she has gone off to Africa to join her gorillas in a peaceful retreat. So now, here's the thing
Well, you know
about
her show
that.
is off. Do you know that much, pop culture?
I did know, but what I'm feeling is that finally she's enough away that I'm starting to be able to breathe again.
Really?
It's like it's like fresh air a little bit. Do you know what I'm saying?
Okay.
I think that's another show. But I have to say, there is a moment that I feel like, well, you know what I feel like with Ellen in Africa? I feel like a little bit like a new man.
That is definitely a soundbite.
The two then go on to discuss reports they've received from people who have been on the Ellen show who have told them that they weren't allowed to discuss Anne or Ellen's past relationship with her, and that if they did, the whole episode would never air and it would be erased from existence. Two things worth noting about that. The first is that this 2 decades later, Ellen claim is still trying to control them is apparently pretty true. We know Ellen is controlling, as we'll discuss later, but it also isn't surprising because they have so many people who have told them this. Additionally, she's been trying to keep Anne quiet. That's a pretty weird thing to do unless Anne does know something disturbing about you beyond just that you're greedy, which isn't good, but this is the sort of thing to hide for 20 years. It's got to be something cray-cray. And importantly, this interview did pop up while Ellen was being blasted for how incredibly abusive she was as an employer. You know, like preventing an employee from attending her child's bone marrow transplant, which came out a few weeks ago. That's the kind of person we're talking about here. Straight up evil and unimaginable shenanigans, so I don't really think there's a bottom for Ellen's behavior, which I do want you to remember that I said that, because there's some stuff later we're going to talk about that, which talk about crossing paths. However, there's one specific employee that I think knew far more information than we are presently aware of. And it was Ellen's executive producer named Twitch. That's a lowercase t, capital case witch. And here's where we're going to take a pause, because some dots are going to connect. Ellen has a lot of odd deaths surrounding her, including ones that I haven't really seen reported on. And it's often people who, for a certain period of time, had a intense close connection to her. For instance, Anne in a relationship with her, and Twitch, who was a very close friend and producer with Ellen. Quitting the yap though, Twitch was a dancer who began growing popular after appearing on Ellen's show, eventually becoming an executive producer, but he seems to be on almost all the episodes. He was a major part of the whole operation from what we know, and was in charge of helping production and planning skits, stuff like that. And he was a face that tens of millions of people around the world were familiar with and saw on a daily or semi-daily basis. He also had a wife and children, which is always heartbreaking for what follows. And important to note though, Twitch loved life. He was not undergoing any financial struggles, as was reported and then was corrected. He had this wife, like we said, a family, and he was their sole provider. He was a man adored by tons of people, yet he wasn't a fame hog, didn't seem like, or relative to those in Hollywood. And considering we're discussing the entertainment industry as a whole, he did seem like a relatively normal-ish dude, but like I said, it's Hollywood weird, so we're gonna take what we can get here. The following that I'm gonna describe is very odd. This well-known TV and film bloke, who has these millions and millions of dollars, lives in what's considered a mansion in Hollywood, and has his family that he loves, for unknown reasons will decide to leave his house one day, that being December the 12th. We don't know how he left, we don't know under what conditions he left, but we do know that he left, but it wasn't in his car. His car remained at home, which was something that his wife will notice later. The next we see of Twitch, it's mid-afternoon, December the 12th, when he checks into the Oak Tree Inn in Encino, California, which is a $100 a night motel. Not the place he would typically be found. And at some point between December the 12th and 11:15 a.m. on December the 15th, Twitch is found dead in his motel room. And of course, the police claim the incident was conducted using a firearm on himself. Shockingly, the police come to this conclusion with barely to not really investigating at all, and the autopsy we don't have the results from, and the case is quickly closed, like I said, without any real investigation. And I do find it funny that TMZ, of all places, king of slop media, even goes and posts an article like, there were no signs. Like, yeah, no, there were no signs because it was a murder. But I do, like I said, have my reasons to doubt what the police said. First of all, there are literally 0 reasons, 0 signs, 0 information, any giveaway that this was at all on his mind. He was reported as being happy, dancing, and just having a great time up until the days before this occurred. I know sometimes there are cases where people don't give signs, but this is the kind of guy who's on the camera all the time and who's around his family a ton. Someone was gonna notice. And I don't like that we're so willing to say people just don't always give signs. Like, no, most of the time they do. In fact, the vast majority of the time they do. And shocker, like all incidences of this kind, the footage showing the cameras that would have shown the outside of the room for which Twitch was staying in, that footage was never released by the LAPD, and we have to take it on their word that no one was seen going in or out of that room. And I've seen what the LAPD has also done when they think no cameras are present, so not really gonna take their word for that one. Number 2, he has this beautiful home with his family. Why is he checking into a crummy motel less than 2 miles away from his house that has no connection to? Doesn't make any sense. Like I said, it's $100 a night, or $107 to be more precise at that time. And I know $107, especially in our economy, is a lot of money, but not for staying somewhere in LA. That's actually probably considered really cheap. And it's also a motel, so we're not talking anything high-end whatsoever. And that's important to remember, because if you've ever stayed at a motel, which, think Super 8, what you might notice is that there's this air of grossness and stickiness, and it's just not very nice. But it's the noises that really get you. You can hear everything. That's because the walls are paper thin. Really more like cardboard if we're being realistic. But it's not that different. When you're at a motel like this, you can hear everything. So how then do we have a motel with a lot of other people staying at it and employees going in and out of rooms? How does nobody hear the gunshot? Gunshots are some of the loudest things you can hear inside of an enclosed space, if not like the loudest you can produce with ease. You would absolutely hear that through several rooms around where Twitch was staying. And yet no one reported this incident, and Twitch's body wasn't found until almost, I guess, 2 days later, when a housekeeper walked in there and saw him in a pool of his own blood. So then I have to wonder, we don't have the footage, we have a suspicious death, and no one hears the shot. It's starting to sound like more of a hit than anything to me. And it's funny, as I was writing this exact same script, I could still hear my neighbors in the other apartments making noises. So if I can hear him here, somebody would have heard Twitch. But possibly more incriminating than this is that Twitch's death occurred 4 months after Anne Heche's. And so we have 2 different people who in 2 different ways had a very unique insight into who Ellen was and into some of her darker secrets, which were alluded to many times by Anne herself. We also have this growing environment of people battling against Ellen, saying she's awful. And then you have someone who would have known Ellen better than anyone else and the stuff that she was doing, her executive producer, goes and dies in a really mysterious way in a crummy motel. It's kind of hard not to think that there is at least some level of connection there. So it does seem like at this point, a lot of these connections from Anne Heche to Twitch are leading back to Ellen in a dark way. However, despite these connections we've already made, there is one that I think may be even more horrifying that we've yet to discuss. And at this point, I want to enter Kathe Ruth Perkoff, better known as Kat. Kat was a turbulent character. She was certainly one of a kind, is what I would say. She ran / managed a lesbian hooker joint, club, drug, and human smuggling facility? Lot to pack into that sentence there, but she was dealing in pimps and prostitutes and other degeneracies at the very minimum. And she was doing all of this by the age of 18, I have seen reported. Now, it's a little bit difficult to find information on her beyond that. In fact, one of the only sources of information on Kat is her Find a Grave site, ironically enough. But we do know that she was connected with the mafia, and likely, I'll just come out and say it. Honestly, if you're drug trafficking, you're human trafficking. You use the same facilities and you get paid way more money for one of them. That said, her sordid past is not the real reason I'm bringing her up, so much as the fact that during these nefarious acts, Kat was simultaneously engaged in a relationship where she lived with a woman named, here's your chance to guess in the comments below, drumroll please, Ellen DeGeneres. That was the case, however, until sometime in mid-1980 when the two started beefing, and Ellen, according to her story, moved out, but I've also seen it reported the other way around. So one day in June, the 26th to be precise, of 1980, because you know we like our facts here, Kat went out to find Ellen at a concert she had gone to, I believe with her brother, or her brother was on stage. Various reportings there. Now, I want to remind you, these are all Ellen's testimony, so take them with a grain of salt. Kat comes up to Ellen at this venue, at this concert, and says to her that they should try again and is begging her to come home. And during this time, Ellen is just completely ignoring her like a 5-year-old. The whole time, Kat's pouring her heart out to her, begging her to come back. So we can see the cruelty of today has been displayed for decades, is one way to put it. Evidently, though, Kat eventually caught the hint that this wasn't going to work out, and so she bolted. And that night after the show, so did Ellen. And as she was driving home, she saw a wreck on the side of the road. The car was in 2 pieces and was on fire. There was no one there, and I've also heard it reported that there were also no sirens going on at first, indicating that first responders were on the way. But once again, Ellen is the only real evidence here, so take it with a grain of salt. Either way, she didn't stop the car to try and help or to try and get help, because at this time, no cell phones. So she just drove home, and according to her report, it wasn't until later that she found out the news that it was Kathe Perkoff who had been in that car accident that she had seen on the road. Odd for sure, but not so odd as the details of this car crash. The white Mercedes that Kathe had been driving had veered off the highway randomly, hit a concrete bridge support beam, and was sliced in half. So now we have an out-of-control car driven by someone related to Ellen in a relationship with her that had a falling out, and it veers off the road and gets into a fiery accident. Wonder why that sounds so familiar. It's like deja vu. And I guess it is convenient that any and all evidence that may have been present in the car ceased to exist, because of the gasoline fire that consumed both the occupant and the vehicle itself. That I find incredibly odd. Let me know what you think down below though. And if I were to continue, I might suggest another strange death related to Ellen, one that I have not seen reporting on whatsoever. And that would be the death of Leslie Jordan, who was a fellow co-star on the PSYOP named Will and Grace. And if one could guess who he acted alongside, who might you guess? That'd be correct, Ellen DeGeneres. And Leslie would die at the age of 67 on October the 24th of 2022, less than 3 months after Anne, and less than 3 months before Twitch, wouldn't you know it. And you're not going to believe this part though. The rumored cause of death for Leslie was a random and entirely unprecedented heart attack while driving. I need not go into all the details about how many different ways there are to make a natural seeming heart attack. Come on, it's prolific, and we've gone on it before. You can see the video on screen of the CIA exactly talking about, with Congress, a device that they have to cause such incidences to occur. And it's at this point, after the heart attack, that Leslie careens into the nearest wall and then is found dead by the authorities. They try to resuscitate him for 40 minutes, which sounds kind of crazy. And then, yeah, he's pronounced dead. I do have a few problems with this story, though. I understand heart attacks are painful, but you must understand as you're driving that your opportunities are to somehow get this car to stop or to die right here. All he has to do is slam on those brakes and pull over a little bit. I don't know if I believe 100% that this heart attack was the actual cause of death. Maybe something else happened to Leslie, or maybe he too wasn't actually in control of the vehicle like Aunt Heche. Or, like I suspect, Kathe Perkoff. This Twitch guy we were talking about earlier kind of seems to have gotten the Kirk treatment. His wife seems really awful. She changed her name on Instagram 2 days after he passed away, and then she went on an interview talking about how she wants to figure out who she is, not as his wife, but she wants to be her new you now that her husband's gone. And then she talked about how her husband wanted his private life to remain private, and then voices a bunch of his private life on this interview. It does get worse. She'll end up publishing a book which includes a bunch of other private information about the family. That's just like a lot of gross stuff for this woman to do. And then another crazy thing was she talks about how she found out all these new things about her husband and how it all made sense what happened, despite her also saying the exact opposite of that at other times. But she says it makes sense because she found a bunch of stuff when looking for a funeral outfit for him in their closet, and it was like mysterious things she'd never seen before. She never tells us what or what that even looks like. But I find that hard to believe. I have a woman. They spend a lot of time in closets picking out outfits. I highly doubt that you found some mysterious boxes of information and letters you've never seen before in your closet. Her whole job was like wearing different outfits and dancing. She obviously spent a lot of time in that closet, more than him. There's no shot that there was some random intel just hidden in there. I don't believe that story. I want to know the real one. But the one that actually gets me, that makes me trust her so much less, she went and had all friends, family, and people attending her husband's funeral sign NDAs that they wouldn't disclose any information about any of this or what happened or what went down. That's ridiculous. Like, come on. I've never heard of that before. That's insanity.
Pictures or clothing and items that maybe had memories tied to them that were so wonderful, and you're having to make all these really hard decisions. But every time I let go of something that I didn't feel was necessary to carry into my next chapter of my new life, it felt like I was releasing an energy with it every single time. And I think my kids did the same thing. We purged ourselves of these emotions, and I thought it was gonna be very, very hard for me to accept love from someone. I thought it was gonna be so difficult because I was like, am I betraying Steven by doing that? And then I did find love, and I feel happier than ever. I really do. And I'm really grateful that I made that choice to open myself up to it, because it's been the best decision I've made in a really, really, really long time. My love and partnership has a completely different energy and a completely different feel now. It feels like a love that's been lived with before. It feels like this is just our third time loving each other. It feels like it's my forever. It feels like it's my future and my support system. And I have such a calmness about this love. I have such a freedom in it, and I feel so safe and secure. And it's brought out a different side of me that I've never lived from. I feel like I lean in more to my feminine side, and I feel so much more alive, and I feel so loved. And so I'm so grateful that I very hesitantly allowed that to come into my life.
It is 3:15 a.m. while I'm editing this, and I thought I'd include this clip. And I just gotta say, I think we have a rival for Erica Kirk for the happiest widow and most suspicious widow in history. So that's a real interview. I mean, those are all words she said. And apparently the book she published is way worse. So just keep that in mind as well. So I don't know, man. These stories just keep getting creepier. Connect that as you may. Okay, interrupting here again. Sorry, guys, for that. I'm going to add one more name to this list. She died technically just a few days after Anne Heche officially did, and it was about a week and change, almost 2, after the original collision that Anne Heche had. But what's interesting about Jackie is that she, like Anne Heche, was opposing child trafficking. More specifically, she was seeking to pass legislation, and she was in a car with 2 other people who were on her staff who had access to whatever information she had. And they all 3 randomly veered off the road and hit an oncoming car. And the person in the other car, as well as everyone in Jackie Walorski's car, died as well. It's a little bit odd because of the child trafficking connection, but also rumors that the 2 are working together. And then on top of that, well, incredibly similar death. I mean, I think that goes without saying. In fact, that her whole squad that would have had probably whatever pertinent information she would have had passed away too. Man, that's pretty wacky. Now we have several deaths all around each other. That's weird. Alright, so from here, I'm just going to start putting out some theories as well as discussing the occult connections and just other weird stuff involved in this whole case. And since so much of this connects back to Ellen, let's just start there. I have a theory that way back when, it wasn't just Kat Perkoff involved in this trafficking. Ellen was as well. I find it hard in my mind to comprehend that Ellen wasn't, considering she was in this multi-year relationship living with somebody. She must have known, and clearly knew because she talks about what Kat was up to. And then on top of that, Ellen was running in the exact same circles of people, and she wasn't making money as a comedian until the mid-late 80s, so she's making money somewhere. This kind of seems like a very plausible place that this was happening. I say this with pride deep inside of me. I've never watched an episode of The Ellen Show. The only time I've come close was for the Jesus incident, which we talked about with the Vegas incident. I'm not gonna go any further than that. We have a full series on that. But her set, it looks exactly like Epstein's Island. She's got the thing in the background. It looks like the temple and sacrifice room at Epstein's Island. She's got the palm trees, got this like beach view. It seems like signaling to me for the other people that are on the set and for anyone who catches on that that's what she's talking about. She's also friends with Diddy, as we'll talk about later. But more disturbing to me is her long history of art, like Podesta level of weird art. Beginning with the sweatshirt that appears to be a bloody face. I've seen this written off as the Castaway volleyball or whatever it is. Clearly it's not that. They don't look similar at all, in my mind at least. Followed by this Dark Thoughts basket, whatever you say his name, piece on her wall. But I'll just show this last one because I'm not certain I can even describe what's on here. It's this paint. It looks like it was done by a kid, but I guarantee she overpaid for. It's got like this reference to the judicial system in the background and these occultic symbols that we see in other ceremonies that are conducted, these rituals. But the most important thing is it looks like someone is mutilating themselves, is all I'll call it for you guys. I also don't know what artist this is attributed to, so if you know, let me know. I'd be very curious. But yeah, it's very clearly hinting at satanic occurrences, we'll call them for now, which we've seen all over pop culture these days, especially with the Epstein situation and the Podesta stuff we just spoke about very recently. And this is just what we've seen in a few snippets of Ellen's house. There could very well be dozens of other photos that are far worse than this in paintings we don't even know about, right? Continuing on that thought, we know that Anne Heche referenced this deep darkness, Anne Heche would have been aware of Kat. Anne Heche would have also been aware of Ellen's creepy tendencies, which have only, I would imagine, grown more prolific with time. So then one's got to wonder if Anne Heche was then referencing this as that darkness she was referring to. And the next guy, we referenced him earlier, but you may not know him. He's pretty obscure. His name's Puff Daddy, aka Diddy. And he's known to deal in the underage, although he's gonna get off. Feds always do. I need not go into the details of what he's into. I think we are all more than well aware, but he's a trafficker. Needless to say, we now have an apparent connection to Epstein with the set, and Ellen's just super close friends with Diddy. She's had him on the show like a dozen times at least. And there's the iconic meme, one of the craziest memes ever made, of where Diddy comes on to the set of a bunch of cancer kids that were invited to Ellen's show and starts dancing with them and talking to them. Pretty horrifying stuff. And there's also the awkward clips of Diddy low-key threatening Ellen and Twitch on stage. Here's one of them. Just gets super creepy. You can tell they're both pretty uncomfortable because Diddy would have all these tapes as well on them.
Yo, Ellen, we go so far back. You don't tell these people how far back we go.
I know, but I wear T-shirts. I don't know what that means. Anyway, all right, let's...
I mean...
You hold that.
Okay,
all right.
I keep this. Take two if the joke didn't work.
No, it's okay.
I don't want no problems.
No, it's okay.
No, hold on. Hey, so...
If Twitch was involved, I want to believe better of him, but I don't know. All that being said, we have some pretty clear darkness emerging and some thematic elements that match other cases we've looked into of where these people really were up to such shenanigans. Also, I'm going to point it out, Anne starts getting comfortable with the idea of talking about all that's happened to her and all that Ellen was up to after Ellen's left the country. And then she ends up dead like a year later, before she can really share everything. I mean, Quinky Dink? I think not. Also, I noticed this, I haven't seen anyone else report this, but there's a movie that Anne did, it's her last one. It was recorded in 2022, like months before her death. Came out in 2025, super low budget. I don't know if it's ever gonna be shown really anywhere, but essentially it contains the story of a girl and this mystical horse. The girl loses her whole family in a car crash and has to go live with someone else. And that's just an odd connection for me. The last thing that Anne acts in, the last thing to come out with her in it is about a car crash. And we also have the fact that Anne's mom is one of two people in that whole family that's living. Almost all of Anne's siblings are dead and the father is dead. Just odd. Almost the whole family that's dead in a car crash except for a lone survivor. And in Anne's case, it was two survivors. I have a question for you. Do you recognize this woman? Now, that isn't actually Anne, although fair to guess that. That's the homeowner of the house that she rammed into. And yes, they do look disturbingly similar. Related levels of similar. And alright, I'll bite the big one on this. This is the one that really gets me thinking. The MK Ultra illusions here are crazy. MK Ultra, also known as Project Monarch, the symbol for them is the butterfly. Monarch butterfly. For instance, we found this on stream. There's a picture of Anne Heche at some function wearing a rather revealing outfit. In that outfit, we can see a tramp stamp of a butterfly, which MK Ultra victims are marked in some regard typically. We also have the fact that she had these mental breaks in this fake character, which you can also find indicative of MK Ultra victims. And then we also find this butterfly reemerge on her tomb that holds her cremated remains. Also convenient, worth a note, cremated remains can never have an autopsy done on them again, unlike a body that's been passed away for a while if preserved appropriately. Just saying. But this butterfly emerges there. Another reference to MK Ultra possibly. And then you also got this photo of her on the front of the tomb, I guess you call it. It actually comes originally from her book, which was published on the 4th of September of 2001. I want you to think about the fact of what happened exactly 1 week later and how odd that timing is. But in this photo, you can see Anne Heche covering one eye. Basically every major celebrity has done. It's a reference to the occult and to the Illuminati or the illuminated ones. It's a pretty dark thing, but it's actually a genuine possibility that that's actually what's going on here. It's pretty wild to think about. Because I honestly couldn't name another reason why you choose this photo and not the hundreds or thousands of others that probably exist of Anne Heche. This one isn't particularly aesthetic. The hand over the eye thing is the only real standout piece about this piece. So that makes me, and a lot of other people suspect this was an intentional symbological reference. Maybe she's trying to get back into Hollywood after being blackballed. Maybe she thought this was the way, and clearly didn't work out for her. That's all I have to say about Anne Heche, but there are several other car crashes now that I think are worth discussing, and we might have to revisit my second video I ever made, because I'm very curious to see just how deep this connection goes and everything that's going on. That being said, thank you guys so much for watching. Okay, my phone camera I ran out of storage on my phone, so I had to end up just doing videos over the last bit. You guys might not have even noticed. But I just wanted to say thank you guys for being here. It means a lot. Thank you guys for sticking it out. Thank you guys for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed first and foremost that. But I also want you guys to know that I'm on break right now. I wanted to get videos out so you guys didn't notice, but I just need a little bit of a break from making content every single day. I got pretty far behind because we started just blowing up. So was able to get a little bit ahead, and from now on I'll be ahead so we can focus on the quality of the cinematography and all that. Also, so you guys can just get the most out of these videos. I appreciate every single one of you guys. Thank you so much, and I cannot wait to see you in the next one.